Secrets once held the power to make or break entire empires. This was the hidden world of ancient espionage, a craft built on unwritten rules, now buried by time. In his ancient work, The Art of War, the strategist Sun Tzu declared that all warfare is based on deception. This video will reveal the forgotten principles these shadow agents lived by, giving you a profound understanding of how information was weaponized long before the digital age. How did a spy become utterly invisible in a crowded city? What silent codes could topple a kingdom without a single sword being drawn? By the end, you will see the invisible threads connecting their clandestine world to our own. What part of your own life might be shaped by these ancient arts of secrecy? The art of ancient espionage was a delicate dance performed in the shadows of bustling marketplaces and royal courts. These operatives did not have satellites or digital bugs. Their most vital tools were their own wits and the ability to read a room. In the vast empires of Rome, Persia, and China, a spy's role extended far beyond simply overhearing secrets. They were architects of perception, planting stories to shift public sentiment, and sometimes their whispered words held more power than an entire army. These agents moved through society unseen, often posing as merchants, scholars, or even slaves. Their success depended on a fragile web of trust, knowing that a single misstep could lead not just to their own demise, but to the downfall of their entire nation. They operated under a strict, unwritten code that prized absolute discretion and an unshakable, albeit often misplaced, loyalty. To appreciate the genius of their lost tradecraft, we must first understand that their work was a profound study of human psychology. They knew that the strongest fortress could be breached not by force, but by exploiting the ambitions and fears of the people inside. This sophisticated understanding of the human heart laid the groundwork for the silent rules that guided their every move, rules we are only now beginning to decipher. A Roman spy moves through a crowded marketplace, his tunic dusty and his manner unremarkable. He is not a muscular warrior or a flamboyant noble, but a man so ordinary he becomes a ghost among the living. His mission is to gauge the loyalty of a local governor, yet his greatest weapon is not a dagger but his utter lack of presence. This embodies the first unwritten rule of ancient espionage, the art of invisibility. These agents perfected the skill of being completely unnoticeable while operating in plain sight. In an age without digital databases or facial recognition, invisibility was a conscious craft. It demanded a deep, almost intuitive understanding of local customs, from the specific way people wore their sandals to the regional greetings exchanged in the streets. A spy in ancient Egypt, for instance, would not merely put on a merchant's robe. He would learn the correct bartering rituals for that city, adopt the local dialect, and even mimic the subtle hand gestures used during trade. As historian Adrian Goldsworthy observes, the most successful spies were those who could simply become part of the scenery, using their anonymity as their ultimate shield. This principle rested on three foundational skills. The first was meticulous observation. Before a spy could blend in, he had to spend days or weeks simply watching, learning the rhythms of daily life, identifying who held real influence, and noting the small details that marked an outsider. The second was the strategic use of disguise. This was less about elaborate costumes and more about adopting a believable, mundane role that provided a plausible reason for being in a sensitive area. A spy might become a scribe, a physician, or a slave, any role that made him functionally invisible to the elite he was observing. The third and most difficult skill was the ability to mimic behaviors without a hint of performance. Any hesitation, any misplaced word, any flicker of uncertainty could unravel the entire operation. How does this ancient rule of blending in translate to our modern world? We see it in the digital footprints we leave online, where maintaining privacy often means not drawing attention to our data. We see it in social situations, where adapting to a new group requires a similar, though less perilous, form of observation and mimicry. This ancient preference for subtlety over brute force reminds us that true influence often works best when it goes completely unseen. But invisibility was only the first step. Once an agent was hidden in plain sight, they faced an even greater challenge: how to report what they had learned without ever speaking a word. This brings us to the second unwritten rule, the mastery of silent communication. In the bustling streets of an ancient Chinese city, two merchants might appear to be sharing a simple pot of tea. To any observer, their meeting is a casual social call. Yet the way one places his cup down, slightly tilted and a hand's width from the edge of the table, conveys a critical message: the governor's caravan will depart at dawn. This intricate dance of non-verbal cues was the lifeblood of espionage, a sophisticated language built on gestures, symbols, and pre-arranged signals. Without the safety of written records, spies developed brilliantly subtle systems to coordinate with their networks. In ancient India, the political treatise known as the Arthashastra details how agents used knotted cords of specific colors and lengths to signify different types of information. A red knot might signal an approaching army, while a blue one could indicate a political betrayal. Similarly, a spy might leave a seemingly ordinary piece of pottery outside a safe house, but the pattern painted on its surface, a series of intersecting lines invisible to the untrained eye, would provide a detailed report on troop movements. These methods demanded absolute clarity and precision. A single misplaced knot or an incorrectly drawn line could lead to catastrophic misunderstandings. The systems often relied on environmental markers and trusted intermediaries. A merchant's cart left at a specific crossroads at noon could signal that a route was safe. A particular song sung by a minstrel in the town square might warn of danger. The Spartans perfected this art on the battlefield, where spies used the highly polished surfaces of their shields to flash coded signals across vast distances, relaying enemy positions with a precision that could turn the tide of a war. This entire silent language was a testament to human creativity under pressure. It required agents and their handlers to operate with a shared, unspoken understanding, a deep trust that the message sent would be the message received. In our own lives, we engage in a quieter version of this same dance every day. We read the subtle body language of a friend to know they are worried, or we understand a partner's mood with a single glance. These ancient spies remind us that the most powerful conversations often happen without a single word being spoken, built on a foundation of careful observation and mutual comprehension. This reliance on flawless, silent coordination set the stage for the spy's most perilous task: the delicate art of building and managing a web of informants, a system where one broken thread could unravel everything. A message delivered to a Byzantine emperor was often crafted with an elegant escape hatch. The warning itself might be vague, the source untraceable, and the information presented in a way that, if intercepted, could be dismissed as an unfounded rumor or a simple misunderstanding. This meticulous design was the essence of the third unwritten rule, the principle of plausible deniability. For the rulers and generals who commanded them, spies were assets that had to remain completely detached. The entire intelligence apparatus was built on layers of insulation, ensuring that if an agent was caught or a plot uncovered, the trail would go cold long before it reached the palace doors. Roman chroniclers detail how agents frequently operated through a chain of cutouts, trusted third parties who relayed messages and orders. A general might never speak directly to the spy in the field. Instead, his instructions would pass through a merchant, then a local artisan, and finally to the operative. This created a protective buffer, allowing the general to truthfully claim he had no direct contact with the individual and therefore no knowledge of their specific actions. The spies themselves were masters of the cover story, constructing entire false identities and backgrounds that were airtight under scrutiny. An agent caught near a military encampment would not claim to be a lost traveler, a story too easily disproven. He would be a cartographer mapping trade routes, a physician seeking rare herbs, or a disgraced nobleman fleeing his homeland. Each role was carefully chosen to explain his presence and withstand casual or even intense investigation. This system, however, created a profound ethical gray area. It placed the operative in immense solitary danger, fully aware they were considered expendable by their distant masters. A case from ancient Persia perfectly illustrates this cold calculus. Spies sent to infiltrate a rival kingdom's court would be provided with clothing, coin, and histories that pointed to a neutral city-state. If discovered, the evidence would suggest the espionage was the work of a jealous neighbor, effectively shielding the Persian king from retaliation and preserving the peace, or at least the illusion of it, between two great powers. The agent became a ghost serving a king who could disavow their very existence. This ancient rule of detached responsibility echoes powerfully in our modern world. We see it in corporate structures where difficult decisions are made through layers of management, or in political strategies where messaging is carefully worded to allow for future reinterpretation. It forces us to contemplate a difficult question: where does ultimate responsibility lie when an action is taken, but the authority behind it remains deliberately hidden? This delicate dance between risk and deniability reveals just how much ancient spies were expected to sacrifice, not just with their lives, but with their very legacy, all to protect the faceless powers they served. An Assyrian scribe, trusted and respected in a foreign court, might have served his king for 20 years before a single piece of critical intelligence was ever passed. His entire life was his mission, a performance so complete it ceased to be an act. This was the fourth unwritten rule, the cultivation of deep cover identities, a practice demanding more than mere disguise. It required a total immersion into a fabricated life, building genuine trust and social standing over years, sometimes decades, to become an invisible fixture within the enemy's very heart. The psychological burden of this existence was immense. An agent had to constantly monitor every word, every reaction, and every casual friendship for potential inconsistencies. He lived with the perpetual fear of a slip of the tongue, of a forgotten detail from a fabricated past, or of a genuine emotional attachment that could compromise his mission. The Spartan Cryptaea, young warriors sent to live among the subjugated Helot populations, embodied this grim reality. They built lives, formed bonds, and shared in the daily struggles of the very people they were secretly monitoring, a duty that could force them to betray those who trusted them most for the sake of the state. Establishing such profound credibility was a slow and meticulous art. It began with the creation of a rock-solid backstory, a legend that could withstand casual inquiry and intense suspicion. An agent would memorize the minute details of his supposed hometown, the names of childhood friends who never existed, and the intricacies of a trade he had spent years genuinely learning. He would then embed himself, often starting on the periphery of a community and gradually, patiently, earning his way into its core through demonstrated skill and unwavering consistency. The final and often most dangerous phase was extraction. After years of service, how does a ghost simply vanish? Some agents were never meant to return, living out their days in their adopted lives. Others were extracted through carefully staged events, a sudden illness prompting a journey to a distant healer, or a fabricated family inheritance requiring immediate travel. Yet for many, reintegration into their homeland was its own kind of prison. They returned as strangers, haunted by the memories of a life they were forced to abandon, forever changed by the person they had to become. What does this ancient, extreme form of role-playing reveal about our own lives? In an age of curated social media profiles and professional personas, we all understand, on some level, the pressure to present a polished version of ourselves to the world. The ancient Spies experience pushes this to the absolute limit, forcing us to ask where the performance ends and the authentic self begins. This profound sacrifice of personal identity for a greater cause leads directly to the most volatile element of the espionage world, the complex and often fragile nature of loyalty itself. A Roman spy, after years embedded within a Gallic tribe, was ordered to betray the chieftain who had become his brother. He carried out his duty and the empire was secured, but the chronicles suggest he never again found peace. This heartbreaking scenario reveals the fifth unwritten rule, the crushing ethics of betrayal and loyalty. For these agents, duty was a chain that often choked their personal morals, forcing them to operate in a profound gray area where friendship was a liability and honesty could mean death. Ancient Chinese philosophers like Han Fei too openly debated this moral calculus, arguing that deception in service of the state was not just necessary, but a virtuous act of sacrifice. The spy's life became a constant internal conflict, a battle between the loyalty sworn to a distant ruler and the genuine bonds formed in their cover life. The psychological toll of this duality was devastating. Imagine the weight of sharing meals with a man for a decade, laughing with his children, and then systematically orchestrating his downfall. Many operatives likely suffered from what we would now recognize as profound guilt and trauma, haunted by the faces of those they were compelled to sacrifice for a greater, often abstract cause. This definition of loyalty was not universal. In the city-states of ancient Greece, a spy might feel a primary duty to his polis, his city, above all else. In the vast tribal networks of the steppes, loyalty was more personal, sworn to a specific chieftain. This cultural variation meant that a spy's internal compass could be pulled in wildly different directions depending on their origin and mission. The consequences of a shifted allegiance could reshape history. An account from ancient Egypt tells of a double agent who, after years of serving the pharaoh, switched his loyalty to a rival faction. The intelligence he provided did not just win a battle, it toppled a dynasty and installed a new royal line, all because one man's conscience finally broke. This forces a difficult parallel to our own time. How do we reconcile similar conflicts when a corporate whistleblower must choose between company loyalty and public safety, or when a government employee exposes secrets they believe are unjust? The ancient spies faced this ultimate question with their lives on the line. Their silent struggles remind us that the true cost of secrecy is not measured in gold or land, but in the fractured souls of those who keep it. This heavy burden of moral compromise was made bearable only by the ingenious and often beautiful tools they used to survive, tools that transformed the most mundane objects into instruments of clandestine communication. A Mesopotamian spy does not carry a suspiciously empty scroll or a polished metal mirror. Instead, he carries a common clay tablet, its surface etched with the mundane accounts of grain shipments. To any official inspecting it, the tablet is utterly ordinary. Yet, baked into the clay are tiny, almost imperceptible indentations between the cuneiform symbols, a coded message completely invisible to the untrained eye. This brilliant simplicity reveals the sixth unwritten rule, the strategic utilization of natural and everyday tools. Ancient spies transformed the ordinary objects of daily life into sophisticated instruments of espionage, hiding their secrets in plain sight by using the world around them as their toolkit. The selection of these tools was a careful science. An object had to be completely inconspicuous for its environment. A hollowed-out walking stick was perfect for a traveler on a long road. A piece of fruit with a message tucked inside its core was a plausible snack for a merchant. In ancient Egypt, agents were known to use specially woven baskets where the pattern of the reeds, not the basket itself, conveyed information. The method was as important as the object. Messages were encoded using everything from invisible inks derived from lemon juice or onion water, which would only appear when heated, to the subtle repositioning of household items. A rug hung over a windowsill in a particular way could signal that a meeting place was compromised. A specific arrangement of pots in a market stall might indicate the arrival of a target. The Arthashastra, that ancient Indian manual of statecraft, details how spies would use seemingly innocent folk rituals, like the placement of ceremonial lamps or the colors of flowers offered at a shrine, to pass complex orders to entire networks of agents. This system, however, was fraught with peril. The very ordinariness of the tools was their greatest strength and their most dangerous weakness. A single clumsy moment, a dropped piece of fruit that splits open to reveal a hidden scroll, or a suspicious guard who decides to snap a walking stick in half, could lead to immediate exposure and capture. The spy had to handle these objects with the same casual familiarity as any genuine citizen, their nervousness buried deep beneath a performance of utter normalcy. We engage in a modern echo of this practice every day. We use encrypted messaging apps on our everyday smartphones, turning a common device into a portal for private conversation. We create complex passwords that look like simple strings of letters and numbers to any observer. The ancient spies remind us that security and secrecy are often woven into the fabric of the mundane, a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. This reliance on clever, low-tech tools hints at the vast and intricate support systems that made such clandestine work possible, the hidden networks that moved these messages across empires. A single spy, no matter how skilled, was a fragile thread in a vast tapestry of information. Their true strength lay not in individual brilliance, but in the intricate, invisible webs they wove around themselves. This was the seventh unwritten rule, the critical importance of network building. In the sprawling bureaucracy of the Byzantine Empire, a spy's most valuable asset was not a hidden dagger, but a carefully curated list of contacts, a network stretching from the lowest kitchen servant to the most influential court official. These informants, often completely unaware they were part of a larger espionage apparatus, provided the scattered pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, revealed everything from troop morale to a governor's secret ambitions. Ancient espionage thrived on these informal connections, understanding that the most valuable secrets are often whispered in markets, overheard in taverns, or carelessly mentioned by a clerk who feels he is among friends. Building such a network was a delicate art of recruitment and incentive. A spy could not simply walk up to a palace guard and ask for state secrets. Instead, they identified individuals with access and a potential vulnerability. A merchant struggling with debt might be offered a generous payment for seemingly trivial information about trade routes. A disgruntled minor official, passed over for promotion, might be flattered into sharing gossip that contained nuggets of strategic value. The incentives were not always monetary. Sometimes the currency was protection, offering to shield a person's family from harm, or it was a promise of future influence, a chance to rise above their station. The key was to make the exchange feel mutually beneficial, or at the very least harmless. Managing the trust within these networks was the most perilous task. Every new informant was a potential point of failure, a link that could break under pressure and expose the entire chain. To mitigate this risk, ancient intelligence systems were often structured as strict hierarchies. A central handler, the spider at the center of the web, would manage several key informants. Those informants might, in turn, have their own sub-sources who knew nothing of the handler's existence. This compartmentalization ensured that if one person was caught and interrogated, they could only betray a limited number of contacts, protecting the heart of the network. It was a system built on calculated risk, where no single individual, not even the primary spy, was irreplaceable. A historical example from China's Warring States period shows the sophistication of this approach. Spy rings did not just bribe random officials, they deliberately targeted individuals based on their clan affiliations and professional guild memberships. An agent might be inserted into a powerful family, not to steal documents, but to slowly, over years, build genuine relationships. They would then leverage those familial ties to gain introductions to other key figures. Similarly, a spy posing as a merchant would join a specific guild, using the trust and camaraderie of that professional brotherhood to gain access to sensitive economic or logistical information. The network itself was the weapon. This ancient reliance on social webs feels strikingly familiar today. How do modern businesses gather competitive intelligence? They do not just rely on secret documents. They analyze public data, attend industry conferences to build relationships, and cultivate sources within professional networks. On social media, our own networks of friends and followers create a vast, informal information sharing system where a casual post can reveal as much as a formal report. The communal aspect of ancient espionage reminds us that information has always flowed through human connections. This deep understanding of social dynamics, of how to manipulate and navigate human relationships, leads us directly to the most subtle and powerful tool in the ancient spy's arsenal, the psychological tactics that could turn an enemy's greatest strength into their most devastating weakness. A whisper in the right ear could be more devastating than 1,000 swords. This was the essence of the 8th unwritten rule, psychological manipulation and misdirection, where the battlefield was the human mind itself. Ancient spies understood that to conquer an enemy, you first had to confuse them, demoralize them, and turn their own strengths against them. Without newspapers or radio waves, these agents became living vectors of disinformation, crafting and spreading narratives designed to erode trust from within. In Roman military campaigns, generals would often deploy agents to infiltrate enemy camps, not to steal plans, but to plant them. A carefully placed rumor of an impending betrayal or a forged order suggesting a withdrawal could cause a well-disciplined army to fracture into paranoid factions, making them vulnerable to a real attack. The art of the believable lie was everything. A successful falsehood had to be grounded in a kernel of truth or play upon existing fears and prejudices. An agent would not simply claim a general was a traitor. He would spread a story about the general being seen in a secret meeting, perhaps with an envoy from a neutral state, and let the listener's own suspicions fill in the damning details. The story would then be seeded through multiple, seemingly independent channels: a conversation overheard in a tavern, a lament from a displaced farmer, a cryptic remark from a traveling priest. This created an echo chamber of misinformation long before the technology for one existed. Oral traditions and public storytelling became powerful vehicles for this kind of propaganda. In ancient Persia, the king's eyes were masters of this craft. They would use double agents to deliver elegantly crafted lies directly to their rivals, information that was just credible enough to be acted upon. A double agent might report that a certain provincial governor was plotting a revolt, knowing the king would then waste resources and sow resentment by investigating his own loyal subject. The goal was not just to deceive, but to provoke a reaction, to force an opponent into a costly mistake born of fear or anger. The ethical lines here were, and remain, profoundly blurred. Is it acceptable to destroy a man's reputation with lies to prevent a war? Is it justifiable to terrorize a population with rumors of an imaginary plague to force a surrender? These ancient operatives lived with these questions daily, their actions justified by a doctrine of ends over means that still resonates in modern information warfare. Today, we see these same principles amplified on a global scale. The fake news that circulates on social media, the deepfake videos, the coordinated influence campaigns, they all operate on this ancient playbook of psychological manipulation. They target our fears, our tribal loyalties, and our cognitive biases, aiming to divide and disorient. Reflecting on this rule forces a sobering realization that the most enduring weapons are not made of steel but of ideas, and that the defense against them has always been and remains a critical and questioning mind. This invisible warfare of perception was, however, supported by a very tangible and physical set of skills, the clandestine arts of movement, entry, and observation that allowed a spy to operate in the most secure locations. A Carthaginian spy moves silently through a treacherous mountain pass, his every step guided by an intimate knowledge of the rock faces and hidden trails. He avoids the main routes not out of fear, but from a profound understanding that the land itself is his greatest ally. This is the ninth unwritten rule, the mastery of terrain and environment, where a spy's survival depended on reading the natural world as fluently as any coded message. In an era before satellite imagery, this geographical literacy was not a luxury. It was the very foundation of mobility and evasion. Spies had to become living maps, memorizing not just the location of a hidden spring, but the sound it made, the type of moss that grew near it, and how its path changed with the autumn rain. Historical accounts from the campaigns of Alexander the Great detail how his most valued scouts were those who could translate a landscape into tactical advantage, identifying the single vulnerable pass through a mountain range or the hidden ford across a raging river. This mastery unfolded in several critical ways. The first was the strategic use of local guides. A smart operative never entered unknown territory alone if he could help it. He would recruit a local hunter, a nomadic shepherd, or a traveling miner, individuals whose everyday lives granted them an encyclopedic knowledge of the land. These guides provided more than just directions. They knew which cliffs were scalable, which forests offered cover, and which valleys were prone to sudden floods. This relationship was a delicate dance of trust and deception, as the spy had to secure their cooperation without revealing his true purpose, often posing as a lost merchant, a pilgrim, or a naturalist. The second element was adaptation to brutal climatic conditions. A spy crossing the Sahara had to understand the patterns of the shifting dunes and the location of secret oases. An agent operating in the frozen north learned to read the ice for safe passage and use the endless winter night as a cloak. Their clothing, their supplies, even their pace of travel, all were dictated by the environment. They moved with the weather, not against it, using a sudden sandstorm or a dense morning fog as natural camouflage to slip past sentries. Finally, the environment itself became a signaling device. In ancient Mesoamerica, Mayan spies developed an incredible system of communication using the jungle canopy and celestial bodies. They would arrange specific types of leaves or break branches in particular patterns along a trail to mark a safe path or warn of danger ahead. The position of certain stars told them not just the direction to travel, but the timing for a message drop or a rendezvous, turning the night sky into a vast, unbreakable codebook. How does this ancient reliance on environmental intelligence translate to our modern world? We see it in the way hikers learn to read a topographic map, understanding how contour lines represent the actual lay of the land. We see it in our use of GPS, a technology that, at its core, is about understanding our position within a vast terrain. The ancient spies remind us that true awareness is more than knowing your address. It is understanding the rhythms, resources, and hidden pathways of the space you inhabit. This deep, symbiotic relationship with the natural world provided a foundation of incredible strength. Yet it was a foundation perpetually threatened by the most unpredictable element of all, the sheer randomness of chance and the constant risk of being discovered. Even the most brilliant spy network could be undone by a single moment of bad luck. This harsh reality leads us to the 10th unwritten rule, the cold calculus of risk and reward. Every mission was a gamble, a high-stakes equation where the value of information was weighed against the near certainty of a brutal death if caught. In ancient Egypt, a spy tasked with stealing military plans from a fortified compound would have faced this calculation head-on. Was the strategic advantage of knowing an enemy's formation worth the high probability of being discovered, tortured, and executed? The choice to proceed or to abort often had to be made in a split second, with nothing but incomplete information and gut instinct to guide them. Greek historians like Herodotus documented how operatives assessed these life or death variables, constantly gauging the enemy's current vigilance, the reliability of their own escape routes, and the ultimate value of the intelligence they sought. To minimize these immense risks, ancient agents relied on meticulous preparation. They always planned multiple escape routes, identifying alleyways, river fords, or sympathetic households that could offer a moment's shelter. They studied the routines of guards, learning when shifts changed and which sentries were less attentive. They carried hidden tools, not for combat, but for evasion, lock picks concealed in a belt or a small, sharp blade sewn into a tunic hem meant for cutting ropes, not flesh. Yet, beyond all planning, the spy's most vital asset was their own intuition. This was a cultivated sense, a quiet voice that screamed to abort when a planned signal was absent or when a familiar face seemed just a little too curious. In the Roman Republic, spies infiltrating Carthaginian forces before a major battle had to make these intuitive calls. One might choose to flee empty-handed, sensing the net was closing, while another, judging the potential reward as monumental, would press on. The intelligence secured by that second spy could reveal a hidden weakness in the Carthaginian line, a piece of information that changed the entire outcome of the war. The historical record is filled with these high-stakes gambles. Some ended in glorious success, securing peace for a generation. Many more ended in silent, anonymous deaths, the agent's name and sacrifice lost to history forever. What does this ancient balance of risk and reward teach us about our own modern decisions? We may not be gambling with our lives, but we face this same calculus in our financial investments, our career changes, and even our personal relationships. We weigh the potential for gain against the possibility of loss, and we rely on our own honed intuition to guide us when the data is incomplete. The ancient spies remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to make a clear-headed decision in spite of it. This constant pressure to perform flawlessly under such extreme duress meant that agents could not be ordinary citizens plucked from the street. They were the product of a rigorous and often brutal regime, a secret curriculum designed to forge the perfect instrument of the state. A young recruit in ancient Sparta did not simply learn to fight. He was systematically broken down and rebuilt into a living instrument of the state. His training in stealth, endurance, and unbreakable silence was not for the glory of the battlefield, but for a life of invisible warfare. This reveals the 11th unwritten rule, the absolute primacy of training and discipline. Before a single secret was ever stolen, a spy was forged through a relentless regimen that honed both mind and body to a razor's edge. In an age without formal academies, this education was a closely guarded tradition, passed from a seasoned mentor to a carefully selected apprentice within the shadows of royal courts or the back rooms of merchant guilds. The Arthashastra, that ancient Indian manual of statecraft, outlines a surprisingly comprehensive curriculum. A prospective agent was not just taught lock-picking or disguise. They were drilled in multiple languages, local customs, law, and even ethical philosophy. The goal was to create a well-rounded individual who could reason, adapt, and justify their actions within a larger framework, making them far more effective than a mere thief. This foundational preparation can be broken down into three critical components. The first was the staggering duration and immersive methods of the training itself. A spy's apprenticeship could last for years, often beginning in adolescence. Trainees were subjected to sleep deprivation, forced marches through hostile terrain, and complex memory tests where they had to recall the precise layout of a room after only a brief glance. They learned to control their breathing and heart rate to remain calm under interrogation, and to withstand physical discomfort without a flicker of reaction. The second component was the ritual of the loyalty oath. Before any real secrets were entrusted to them, recruits were often required to swear binding vows to their king, their city, or their handler. These were not casual promises, they were sacred pledges, sometimes sealed with blood or sworn before deities, designed to create an unbreakable psychological bond. To break such an oath was to betray not just a leader, but the very fabric of their society and their own soul. The final, grim component was the ever-present consequence of failure. In ancient China, imperial spies were schooled in Confucian ideals of loyalty and righteousness, but they also learned the brutal price of betrayal. A trainee who failed a critical test, or a full agent who was caught, could expect not just personal execution, but the potential annihilation of their entire family line. This stark reality made the stakes of their education unbearably high, ensuring that only the most mentally resilient and fiercely devoted individuals ever graduated to the field. How does this ancient, intense form of preparation mirror our own world? We see its echoes in the years of residency required for a surgeon, where discipline and precision are matters of life and death. We see it in the rigorous training of pilots or emergency responders, who must perform flawlessly under extreme pressure. The ancient spies remind us that true expertise in any high-stakes field is never accidental. It is the product of relentless, structured, and often grueling preparation. This foundational forging of human agents through discipline set the stage for their most ingenious inventions, the specialized tools and clever technologies that extended their reach and amplified their cunning. That same Roman spy would not rely on memory alone for his most critical messages. In his possession was a simple wooden disc, two concentric circles that could rotate against each other, each rim marked with the letters of the alphabet. By aligning them to a prearranged setting, he could transform a plain text report into a seemingly random string of characters, a code unbreakable to anyone without an identical device. This humble cipher wheel embodies the 12th unwritten rule, the relentless innovation in covert technology. Faced with immense limitations, ancient spies became masters of invention, transforming everyday objects into sophisticated tools that amplified their secrecy and reach. The development of encryption was a primary focus. The Greek Cytale provides a brilliant example. A Spartan commander would wrap a thin strip of leather or parchment in a tight spiral around a specific tapered rod. He would then write his message along the length of the rod. When unwrapped, the strip appeared to hold only a jumble of meaningless letters, but when wound around a rod of the exact same diameter and taper, the letters would align perfectly, revealing the original text. It was a system that relied not on complex mathematics, but on a shared physical object, a key in the most literal sense. This principle of physical encryption extended to the materials themselves. Spies used wax tablets that could be smoothed clean after a message was read, leaving no permanent record. They wrote on papyrus with inks made from milk or fruit juices that remained invisible until heated over a flame. A seemingly blank sheet could hold the fate of an empire, its secrets revealed only by the careful application of a candle. The very clothing they wore was engineered for deception. Tunics were sewn with hidden pockets and false linings. Belts could be hollowed out to hold a tightly rolled scroll. Some accounts suggest the use of specially designed sandals with soles that could be pried apart to conceal a small map or a poison pellet. The parallels to our own time are striking. We use complex digital encryption to protect our data, a virtual version of the Cytale rod that scrambles our messages into unreadable code. We employ two-factor authentication, a modern echo of requiring both a written cipher and a physical token to access information. Our hidden folders and encrypted drives are the digital descendants of those hollowed-out coins and secret compartments. This ancient drive to innovate reveals a timeless truth. The arms race between secrecy and discovery is as old as civilization itself. The tools may evolve from wood and wax to silicon and code, but the underlying impulse remains, the need to stay one step ahead through sheer ingenuity. This universal human drive for technological advantage, however, was always shaped and colored by the distinct cultures that gave it birth. A spy in the Persian Empire would not merely learn the language, he would adopt the intricate rituals of Zoroastrian fire worship, understanding that true trust was built at the altar, not in the throne room. This deep cultural immersion defines the 13th unwritten rule, adaptation to cultural norms. To be invisible, an agent had to do more than look the part. They had to think, act, and believe like the people they were living among, navigating the unspoken codes of honor, religion, and social hierarchy that governed every interaction. A simple misstep, like using the wrong hand to accept a gift or failing to show the expected deference to an elder, could shatter a carefully constructed cover in an instant. Ancient operatives became amateur anthropologists, studying their target culture with a scholar's intensity. They learned the local creation myths, the proper greetings for different social classes, and the complex significance of public festivals. The Greek historian Herodotus, in his travels, noted how the Egyptians considered it a grave offense to salt their food in the presence of a priest, a subtle cultural landmine that a poorly prepared spy could easily trigger. This research was a form of intelligence gathering in itself, often conducted through patient observation and by discreetly questioning sympathetic locals who believed the agent was merely a curious foreigner trying to avoid a social blunder. The risks of a cultural misstep were catastrophic. In ancient India, a spy posing as a merchant might be invited to a royal dinner. If he failed to observe the strict caste rules regarding food preparation and sharing, his ignorance would immediately brand him as an impostor, leading to his arrest and likely execution. It was not enough to know the words, you had to understand the music of the culture, the rhythm of its daily life, and the values it held sacred. This is where cultural empathy became a strategic advantage, not just a defensive tactic. A case from the Mauryan Empire in India illustrates this power perfectly. Spies would sometimes pose as wandering ascetics, holy men who had renounced worldly possessions. By fully embracing this role, living in poverty and dedicating themselves to spiritual study, they gained a level of access and trust that no wealthy merchant or diplomat could ever achieve. Royals and generals would seek them out for blessings and advice, unknowingly revealing their deepest fears and ambitions in the presence of someone they believed was beyond worldly concerns. The spy's spiritual authority, earned through genuine cultural adaptation, became his ultimate listening device. How does this ancient rule resonate in our globally connected world? Modern business executives and diplomats face a similar challenge when navigating international deals. Understanding the importance of building relationships before discussing contracts in some cultures, or knowing the significance of exchanging gifts in others, is the corporate equivalent of this ancient tradecraft. It is the recognition that human connection, built on a foundation of cultural respect, is the most powerful tool for gathering influence and information. This profound need for cultural fluency reminds us that to truly understand someone, you must first seek to understand the world they live in, a principle that guided the final, most lasting aspect of the ancient spies' work, the enduring legacy they left behind. A clever spy in ancient China knew that chains and threats created only silence or lies. His true talent lay in the gentle art of conversation, transforming a simple chat over tea into a masterclass in information extraction. This reveals the 14th unwritten rule, the profound skill of interrogation without force. While popular tales might focus on dungeons and instruments of pain, the most effective ancient tradecraft relied almost entirely on psychological subtlety. Building genuine rapport, offering carefully measured flattery, or subtly exploiting a target's hidden fears, these methods yielded intelligence that was not just extracted, but willingly shared. The great strategist Sun Tzu himself argued for this approach, stating that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, a principle that extended directly to the interrogation chamber. Why risk creating a bitter enemy who would say anything to stop the pain, when you could cultivate a source who trusted you enough to reveal the truth? This technique began with the mastery of deceptive questioning. A Roman spy, for instance, would not directly ask a captured soldier about his legion's battle plans. Instead, posing as a sympathetic confidant, he might lament the hardships of military life, sharing a fictional story about his own brothers serving in a distant army. He would then casually wonder how his brother's commanders managed their supply lines, a seemingly innocent question that invited the soldier to compare and boast about his own unit's efficiency. Without ever realizing he was being interrogated, the soldier would inadvertently reveal critical logistical details. The spy's questions were always open-ended, designed to encourage conversation, not yes or no answers. He would frame his inquiries as requests for advice or expressions of shared frustration, making the target feel like a valued participant in a dialogue, not a victim of an inquisition. The entire process was governed by an immense, almost unnatural patience. An agent understood that confessions were not won in a single dramatic moment, but were slowly, gently elicited over days or even weeks. He might spend countless hours drinking with a disgruntled official, listening with feigned sympathy to complaints about a superior, before ever steering the conversation toward state secrets. This patience was a form of psychological investment, building a debt of trust that the target would eventually feel compelled to repay with information. The spy became a mirror, reflecting the target's own thoughts and feelings back at them, creating a bond that felt more authentic than any threat could ever be. Where a torturer relied on the immediate fear of pain, the skilled interrogator banked on the deeper, more powerful human need for connection and understanding. This approach, however, existed within a complex ethical landscape. While it avoided physical brutality, it involved a deep and deliberate manipulation of the human psyche. Was it truly more ethical to psychologically dismantle a person, to befriend them under completely false pretenses, than to inflict physical suffering? The ancient practitioners lived with this moral ambiguity, justifying their actions by the quality and reliability of the intelligence they secured. A truth given willingly, even under manipulation, was far more likely to be accurate than a scream forced out by agony. Modern interrogators and negotiators can learn much from this ancient balance, from police detectives building rapport with a witness to business negotiators seeking to understand a competitor's true position. The principles remain unchanged. The goal is to listen more than you speak, to build trust before you demand answers, and to understand that the most valuable secrets are often given, not taken. This sophisticated reliance on human psychology over brute force required significant investment, a financial reality that leads us directly to the often overlooked economic engine that powered the entire shadow world of ancient espionage. A Phoenician merchant's unusually keen interest in the tides and coastal currents was never about navigation. He was mapping the secret trade routes of a rival city, seeking to corner the market on the priceless purple dye extracted from sea snails. This quiet war for wealth defines the 15th unwritten rule: economic espionage and resource control. Long before the term corporate espionage existed, kingdoms understood that true power was built not just on armies, but on controlling the flow of goods, gold, and innovation. The battlefield was the marketplace, and the spies were its invisible generals. Ancient states systematically targeted key industries that formed the backbone of a rival's economy. In Egypt, agents were dispatched up the Nile to learn the agricultural secrets of neighboring kingdoms, returning with knowledge of new irrigation techniques or hardier strains of wheat. A Roman operative might pose as an apprentice in a Gallic metalworking shop, not to steal a single sword, but to understand the entire process of iron smelting, a technological advantage that could arm legions for decades. The goal was always to weaken a competitor's economic foundation, making them dependent or vulnerable. To achieve this, spies employed a toolbox of dirty tricks that feel startlingly modern. Bribes were the most common weapon, used to lure away a rival's skilled artisans with promises of greater wealth and status elsewhere. A single defecting glassblower from Syria could establish a whole new industry in Rome, shattering a regional monopoly. When bribes failed, sabotage was the next option. Agents might secretly taint a shipment of wool with pests to ruin its value, or spread rumors among a competitor's workers that their pay was about to be cut, inciting unrest and delays. The impact of these covert operations on ancient economies was profound. A case from the height of the Silk Road shows how a network of spies, stationed at key oases and mountain passes, would report on the size and composition of rival caravans. This intelligence allowed their patrons to flood the market with similar goods just as the caravan arrived, crashing prices and bankrupting the competition. It was a way to control the luxury good markets from thousands of miles away, manipulating supply and demand with the precision of a modern central bank. This ancient struggle for economic dominance forces a direct comparison to our world today. How different is that Phoenician spy from a modern corporate operative who reverse engineers a competitor's product or hacks into their servers to steal blueprints? The methods have evolved from papyrus scrolls to digital packets, but the underlying motive remains identical: to secure a financial advantage by any means necessary. This relentless pursuit of prosperity, however, came at a deeply personal cost for the agents in the field, men and women who traded their own futures for the economic security of the powers they served. That Mesopotamian agent carried a name given to him by his handlers, a name his own parents would not recognize. He represents the 16th unwritten rule, the complete sacrifice of personal identity. To protect a single, vital secret, these individuals were required to surrender their past, their connections, and the very core of who they were, living lives of profound isolation behind a mask that eventually became their only face. Ancient epic poems often portray these figures as solitary shadows, their personal dreams and griefs entirely consumed by the demands of their duty. The psychological toll of this erasure was immense. An agent had to constantly suppress their own instincts, memories, and emotional responses. A man who grew up fearing snakes might have to pose as a snake charmer, fighting his own visceral terror every single day. A woman who cherished her family might be forced to avoid them for decades, watching from a distance as her children grew up without her. This internal fragmentation, this constant war between the self you were and the self you had to perform, could lead to a deep, lingering loneliness that no victory could ever truly cure. To build such a durable false identity, the methods were exhaustive. It began with the creation of a watertight legend, a fabricated history rich with mundane, verifiable details. An agent would not just invent a hometown, they would memorize the name of its well, the local festival dates, and the childhood nickname of a fictional neighbor. They would then live that legend, practicing a trade until their hands showed the correct calluses, or studying a regional dialect until they dreamed in its accent. In ancient Japan, ninja operatives, known as shinobi, were masters of this art, often maintaining several distinct identities across a single lifetime. A shinobi might be a humble farmer in one province, a traveling monk in another, and a disgraced samurai seeking redemption elsewhere, each role requiring a total severance from his original clan and family. Reintegration into their former lives was the rarest and most difficult outcome. After 20 years as a successful merchant in a foreign capital, who do you become when the king finally recalls you? The person you once were is gone, replaced by a collection of practiced mannerisms and borrowed memories. Some returning agents were housed in secluded estates, treated as honored but dangerous secrets, unable to share their true experiences with anyone. Others simply vanished, choosing to disappear into their cover identities forever, finding a strange peace in the only life they had left. This ultimate sacrifice forces us to ask a difficult question about our own world. What is the true cost of the secrets we keep, even the small ones, when we hide parts of ourselves to fit in at work or to maintain a fragile peace at home? We engage in a tiny, silent echo of that ancient tradecraft. The Mesopotamian spy's lost name reminds us that every mask, no matter how necessary, carries a weight, and that the greatest price of a hidden war is often paid not in gold or land, but in the quiet erosion of a single human soul. This profound personal cost could not be managed by individuals alone. It demanded a structure, a set of ancient laws and shadowy protocols that governed the entire treacherous enterprise. A Spartan spy captured by Athens would be executed as a criminal, yet if he succeeded, his own city would honor him as a savior. This stark contradiction lies at the heart of the 17th unwritten rule, the navigation of profound legal and moral gray zones. Ancient spies did not operate in a world with clear international laws or codes of conduct. Their work existed in the shadows between patriotic duty and dishonorable deception, forcing them to constantly weigh their actions against personal ethics and the ambiguous concept of the greater good. In his philosophical dialogues, Plato himself wrestled with this very problem. questioning whether it was ever morally acceptable for a ruler to lie to the people for the benefit of the state. This debate was not academic for the spy in the field. It was a daily reality where the ends were often used to justify treacherous means. The legal consequences for espionage varied wildly across the ancient world, reflecting these deep cultural divides. In the highly militarized society of Sparta, a spy caught abroad was simply a soldier who had failed his mission, and his death was considered an expected sacrifice. In the more legally complex Roman Empire, a captured agent might be put on trial as a traitor against the state, a public spectacle designed to deter others. Yet in the diplomatic courts of Persia, the same spy might be ransomed back to his homeland as a political bargaining chip, his life valued as a commodity in a larger game. This lack of a universal standard meant that an agent never knew if his capture would mean swift death, prolonged torture, or a negotiated release. To operate within this ambiguity, spies and their masters often sought a higher sanction for their actions. They looked to divine approval or royal decree to absolve them of moral responsibility. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were considered living gods, and an order from the throne was, by definition, a righteous act. A spy could tell himself that in serving the pharaoh, he was serving the will of the gods themselves, placing his actions beyond mere mortal judgment. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, agents were sometimes given sacred amulets by temple priests, a tangible symbol that their dangerous work had the blessing of the divine, shielding them from spiritual guilt even as they broke secular oath. Amidst this external chaos, many operatives were forced to develop their own internal moral compass. Without a handler to guide their every move, they had to make split-second decisions in the field. Was it acceptable to betray a friend who had shown them nothing but kindness? Could they justify causing a famine by sabotaging grain supplies to weaken an enemy army? These were not theoretical questions. We see evidence of this internal conflict in rare personal accounts, where agents express deep anguish over the human cost of their missions. Some developed a brutal, utilitarian code, where any action was permissible if it secured victory for their homeland. Others clung to small, personal lines they would not cross, perhaps refusing to harm children or kill unarmed civilians, creating their own fragile islands of ethics in a sea of moral compromise. How do these ancient gray zones persist today? Modern intelligence agencies still grapple with these same dilemmas, debating the ethics of drone strikes, digital surveillance, and the treatment of detainees. The justifications remain strikingly similar: appeals to national security and the greater good. Reflecting on this ancient rule forces us to confront a timeless and unsettling question. When security demands secrecy, where should we, as a society, draw the line between necessary deception and unacceptable corruption? The ancient spies had no easy answers, and their silent struggles suggest that we may not either. A courtesan in ancient Athens moves through a symposium, her laughter mingling with the philosophical debates of powerful men. They see a charming companion, but she is a listening post, her every gesture calibrated to steer conversation toward matters of state. This was the 18th unwritten rule, the strategic deployment of women in espionage. Throughout history, women operated with a unique and devastating effectiveness, precisely because they moved through social and political spaces often invisible to male agents. They leveraged relationships and manipulated societal expectations, turning the very assumptions that underestimated them into their greatest tactical advantage. Ancient historians like Tacitus documented their influence, noting how Germanic women would accompany their men into battle, not just for support, but to gather intelligence on enemy morale and positions, information that could decide the fate of a campaign. The tactics employed by these women were as diverse as their roles. Some, like the courtesan, used their social access to the inner circles of power, cultivating trust and extracting secrets during moments of unguarded intimacy. Others operated with far more lethal intent. In ancient India, the Artha Shastra describes the Vishkanya, women raised from childhood to be immune to various poisons. They were trained not just in the art of administering toxins, but in the subtler arts of persuasion and seduction, sent to infiltrate the courts of rival kings as dancers or concubines. A single kiss or a sip of shared wine could deliver a fatal dose, eliminating a threat without a single soldier ever drawing a sword. Yet the risks these women faced were uniquely severe. A male spy caught in the act might be executed as a soldier, but a woman discovered in deception faced additional layers of social condemnation and often far more brutal, personalized retribution. Her reputation would be destroyed, and her actions viewed not as patriotic duty but as a profound violation of natural order. The cultural attitudes toward their involvement were deeply conflicted. In societies that prized female modesty and seclusion, a successful female spy was a living contradiction, a hero who could never be publicly honored, her victories buried alongside her true identity. Her value to the state was immense, yet her work was often dismissed or regarded with a mixture of awe and suspicion. What does this complex history reveal about gender dynamics in intelligence? It demonstrates that the fight for information has always utilized every available human resource, and that perceptions of weakness can be expertly fashioned into a weapon. The ancient courtesan and the Vishkanya remind us that the most effective spy was not always the strongest warrior, but the most perceptive individual, the one who could master the intricate theater of social power. This long history of diverse operatives, from the invisible merchant to the influential courtesan, forces us to look beyond the individual and see the larger, interconnected system they served. A web of intelligence that spanned continents and required a sophisticated method of preservation to survive the ages. The methods of a spy in the tribal steppes relied on memory and song, but an imperial agent in Rome carried coded scrolls. This fundamental shift from oral tradition to written systems marks the 19th unwritten rule, the constant evolution and adaptation of espionage itself. Tradecraft was never a static set of secrets. It was a living discipline that morphed with every technological breakthrough, political upheaval, and encounter with a foreign culture. As societies grew more complex, so too did their shadow wars, refining old techniques and inventing new ones to meet an ever-changing landscape of threats. The very invention of writing revolutionized the spy's world. Oral intelligence, passed from one trusted messenger to another, was vulnerable to faulty memory and distortion. Written codes, however, allowed for precision and complexity previously unimaginable. An Egyptian cryptographic method, using a simple substitution cipher where one hieroglyphic symbol stood for another, might travel along trade routes to influence a Roman spy master, who would then adapt it for his own Latin alphabet. This cross-pollination of ideas was a constant driver of innovation. A Byzantine intelligence network did not invent its methods in a vacuum. It integrated the best practices of the Persians it fought and the Arab scholars it encountered, creating a hybrid system more resilient than any single tradition. This evolution was often forced by painful failure. A case from the decline of the Roman Empire shows this desperate adaptation in stark detail. For centuries, Roman spies had focused on the structured armies and political courts of their rivals. But when faced with the chaotic guerrilla tactics of barbarian invasions, their old methods faltered. They could not infiltrate a tribe that had no central court, nor bribe a chieftain whose loyalty shifted with the seasons. In response, Roman intelligence had to transform. They recruited scouts from among the very peoples they fought, learning to read the signs of the land and the subtle signals of tribal gatherings. They shifted from stealing written battle plans to interpreting oral prophecies and tracking the movement of nomadic clans. It was a brutal, on-the-job education in a new kind of warfare, one that required a fluidity their imperial bureaucracy was never designed to handle. How does this ancient struggle to adapt inform our modern world? We see it every day as intelligence agencies scramble to counter cyber threats that did not exist a generation ago, or as they learn to pass the chaotic flow of information on social media. The core lesson is that no technique, no matter how brilliant, remains effective forever. The true strength of spycraft lies not in a specific tool or trick, but in the capacity to learn, to borrow, and to change. This relentless adaptation across centuries ensured the survival of the spy's art, but it also transformed the very stories we tell about these shadowy figures, weaving their real exploits into the rich tapestry of cultural myth and legend. The cunning of Odysseus was not merely a warrior's bravery, it was the strategic deception of a master spy. His wooden horse was the ultimate intelligence operation, a masterpiece of psychological warfare disguised as a religious offering. This blurring of fact and fiction introduces the 20th unwritten rule, the profound role of mythology and legend. Ancient espionage was not just a tactical endeavor, it was a narrative one, woven into the very myths and epic tales that defined a culture's identity. These stories served as powerful allegories, romanticizing the spy's work and subtly teaching the values of cleverness, resourcefulness, and strategic deceit to entire generations. Epic tales directly influenced the training and mindset of real-world operatives. A young recruit in ancient Greece would have been raised on the Homeric hymns, learning from Odysseus that a well-told lie could be more effective than a well-aimed spear. These myths provided a moral and practical framework, justifying actions that might otherwise be considered dishonorable by framing them as necessary for a greater heroic cause. The stories were a form of cultural conditioning, preparing the populace, and especially those in positions of power, to appreciate and utilize the shadowy arts of statecraft. Mythology itself is filled with symbolic codes that mirror the silent language of spies. The Norse god Loki, a shapeshifter and master of misdirection, embodies the core spy traits of deception and adaptability. His schemes were not random chaos, but intricate plots that exploited the weaknesses and trust of the other gods. Similarly, the Egyptian god Thoth, as a divine scribe and mediator, represents the clandestine passing of knowledge and the power of encoded information. In these divine dramas, the gods themselves are engaged in a celestial intelligence game, their mythical struggles reflecting the very real covert battles waged by the kingdoms that worship them. This narrative tradition inevitably blurred the lines between religion, myth, and intelligence. Prophecies from oracles were a form of intelligence analysis, offering cryptic forecasts that rulers had to interpret and act upon. A spy might even use the trappings of religion as a perfect cover, posing as a pilgrim or a priest to move undetected across borders, their sacred mission providing a plausible reason for travel and inquiry. The most effective legends did not just inspire spies, they provided them with a divine playbook, a set of archetypal roles and strategies sanctioned by the gods themselves. What does this deep human urge to mythologize secrecy tell us? It suggests that we have always understood that the most significant conflicts are won not just with physical force, but with the stories we tell about that force. These ancient legends remind us that espionage is a fundamental human drama, a timeless dance of truth and deception that continues to captivate our imagination, a testament to the enduring power of a well-crafted narrative. This world of gods and heroes, however, demanded a very human and physical stamina from the agents who served them. A Mongol courier could ride for 3 days without sleep, his body a living instrument of the empire's will. This relentless physical demand defines the 21st unwritten rule, the absolute necessity of endurance and raw physical prowess. While cleverness and disguise were vital, they meant nothing if an agent collapsed from exhaustion or fell ill in the wilderness. These operatives were elite athletes in a hidden arena, their survival and success depending on a body honed to withstand deprivation, violence, and the brutal elements. Ancient training manuals from Asian dynasties detail regimens that would challenge modern special forces. Prospective spies were drilled in long-distance running, often with weighted packs, and trained in silent movement through difficult terrain. Martial arts were not just for combat, but for developing the mental focus and control needed to remain perfectly still for hours or to escape restraints if captured. Their fitness was a form of intelligence, a living tool as critical as any cipher wheel. This physical preparation extended into meticulous dietary practices. Agents learned which local plants could sustain them on a long journey and which could be used to purify water. They understood that carrying rich foods could slow them down or make them sick, so they often traveled on simple, high-energy rations like dried meats, nuts, and specific grains that provided lasting fuel without digestive distress. Knowledge of herbal medicine was another essential layer of their resilience. A spy operating far from any healer had to be his own physician. He learned which roots could dull the pain of a sprain, which leaves could staunch bleeding, and which berries were safe to eat when supplies ran low. This was not abstract knowledge, it was a practical survival kit carried in his memory, allowing him to treat dysentery from contaminated water or a fever from an infected wound. The connection between physical and mental endurance was deeply understood. The ability to push through pain, hunger, and exhaustion was a discipline of the mind as much as the body. In ancient Mesoamerica, the Mayan postal runners who also served as intelligence gatherers exemplified this fusion. They ran incredible distances across mountainous jungle trails, their trained bodies and unwavering mental focus creating a communication network that moved faster than any other system in the region. Their physical feat was an information service, a testament to how the human body itself could become a technology of espionage. How does this ancient emphasis on holistic resilience translate to our modern lives? We see it in the training of first responders and astronauts, where physical health is directly tied to performance under extreme stress. We understand it in our own pursuit of wellness, recognizing that a healthy body supports a clear, focused mind capable of handling life's challenges. The ancient spy's reliance on his own physical capacity reminds us that even in our technologically advanced world, the most fundamental tool we possess is our own resilient human form, a truth that seamlessly connects to the vast, intricate networks these agents used to share the intelligence their bodies had carried. A Celtic spy would never risk a written note, instead carrying a seemingly simple folk song in his mind. Its verses, repeated under his breath, held the precise locations of enemy encampments and the names of traitorous chieftains, a flawless report delivered from memory alone. This mastery defines the 22nd unwritten rule, the formidable power of oral tradition. In a world without secure documents, the human mind was the ultimate vault, and spies perfected the art of storing critical intelligence within it, using mnemonic devices, rhythmic poetry, and narrative patterns to ensure perfect recall. Across cultures with robust oral histories, from the Celtic bards to the West African griots, espionage seamlessly wove itself into these traditions. The lengthy recitations of epic poems were not just entertainment, they were a cultural gymnasium for memory, training individuals to hold and transmit vast amounts of information with stunning accuracy. For a spy, this skill was a matter of life and death. The techniques for enhancing memory were both sophisticated and deeply personal. Many agents used the method of loci, a mental walkthrough of a familiar place, like their childhood home or a temple's halls. They would visualize each piece of information, a number of soldiers stationed by the front door, the type of weapons stored in a bedroom, a general's name whispered from the kitchen hearth. By taking a mental stroll, they could retrieve the entire intelligence report in perfect order. Others relied on rhythmic patterns, turning dry facts into verses with a specific meter or rhyme scheme, the way a song lyric lodges in your mind long after you have heard it. Association was another powerful tool, linking a new piece of information to a strong sensory memory, like the smell of rain or the taste of a specific spice, creating a mental trigger for flawless recall. Storytelling itself became the primary vehicle for intelligence sharing. A spy would not simply list facts to his handler. He would weave the information into a compelling narrative, perhaps a parable about a foolish farmer and a cunning fox, where the details of the story corresponded exactly to military movements and political alliances. This method made the information easier for both the sender to remember and the receiver to understand and, in turn, retell. The griots of West Africa, the revered oral historians and musicians, were sometimes the perfect agents. A traveling griot was a welcome and unthreatening figure in any village or court. His performances, which preserved the history and genealogy of great families, could easily embed coded messages about troop morale or supply shortages within the epic tales, a secret broadcast hidden in plain hearing. This system, however, had its inherent limitations. The human chain of memory was only as strong as its weakest link. A messenger could fall ill, be killed, or simply misremember a crucial detail with catastrophic consequences. The death of a single agent could mean the permanent loss of an entire network's intelligence, a vulnerability that written records, for all their risks, did not possess. Reflecting on this ancient reliance on mental fortitude forces a question about our own digital age. In a time when we outsource memory to our devices, letting our phones remember phone numbers and our computers store our schedules, have we lost a crucial form of intellectual resilience? The ancient spies remind us that the most secure and portable database ever created rests between our ears, a testament to a form of rigor and discipline that we are only now beginning to appreciate once more. An ambassador's golden tongue could speak of peace while his eyes mapped the fortifications of his host's capital. This seamless fusion defines the 23rd unwritten rule, the deep intersection of diplomacy and espionage. In the ancient world, the envoy and the spy were often two faces of the same individual, operating in a gray zone where official missions provided the perfect cover for clandestine observation. Historical records, like the diplomatic archives of the Hittite Empire, show that treaties were not just negotiated, they were informed by detailed intelligence gathered by the very ambassadors who signed them. These diplomatic spies held a dual role of immense strategic value. Officially, they were advisors or emissaries sent to foster goodwill and negotiate terms. Unofficially, they were intelligence operatives whose access to the inner chambers of power was unparalleled. A Sumerian diplomat visiting a rival city-state would not merely discuss trade agreements. He would note the morale of the palace guards, memorize the layout of the citadel, and gauge the health and temperament of the king, all under the protective cloak of diplomatic immunity. This access made them the most valuable and most vulnerable assets in a ruler's arsenal. Diplomatic summits and grand festivals became hotbeds for this quiet intelligence exchange. In ancient Greece, during the Olympic truce, representatives from warring city-states would meet under a pledge of peace. While publicly honoring the gods, these envoys were actively assessing each other's physical condition, listening for hints of economic strain in casual conversation, and secretly meeting with turncoats who were drawn by the neutral setting. The pageantry of a state visit was the perfect theater for this shadow play, where every toast and ceremonial gift could be a calculated move in a larger game of information. The ethical boundaries here were perpetually blurred. Where did legitimate diplomatic inquiry end and illicit espionage begin? For the Han Dynasty emissaries sent to Central Asia, the line was virtually non-existent. Their official mission was to establish friendly relations and secure trade routes along the Silk Road. Their clandestine task, however, was to meticulously document everything they saw, from the strength of nomadic armies to the locations of fertile valleys and mountain passes, intelligence that would later guide military campaigns and economic strategies. This ancient blending of roles is not a relic of the past. How does a modern trade delegation differ from those Han emissaries? Today, diplomats and trade officials still gather economic data, assess political stability, and build relationships that can be leveraged for national advantage, all under the legitimate banner of international relations. The ancient world simply accepted this duality as a necessary component of statecraft, a pragmatic recognition that peace and war are two sides of the same coin, and information is the currency for both. This delicate dance in the halls of power, however, placed the diplomatic spy in a uniquely precarious position, where a single misstep could lead to a diplomatic firestorm or a very personal and very silent demise. A Babylonian spy's carefully planned infiltration ended not in triumph, but in a public execution that sent shockwaves through the empire's intelligence network. This stark outcome reveals the 24th unwritten rule, the enduring legacy of failed missions. Ancient espionage was not a perfect science, and its evolution was often driven more by catastrophic mistakes than by brilliant successes. Each botched operation became a painful but vital lesson, a case study that forced entire systems to reform, adapt, and strengthen their defenses against future errors. The analysis of these common failure points was a brutal but necessary process. In the case of the Babylonian disaster, the breakdown was traced to a single, misplaced trust. A low-level informant, motivated by a personal grudge, betrayed the entire cell to the authorities. This highlighted the perpetual vulnerability of human networks, where loyalty could be fractured by emotions that no amount of training could fully anticipate. Other missions failed due to poor operational planning, like a spy in ancient Greece who used a coded signal that was too complex, leading to a fatal miscommunication with his handler. Sometimes the failure was simply bad luck, an agent recognized by a childhood acquaintance in a city he was never supposed to have visited. These post-mortem investigations, often documented on clay tablets or preserved in oral traditions, created a grim curriculum for future agents. The impact of a single failure could reshape intelligence strategies for generations. Following the exposure of a major spy ring in the Greek city-states, rival powers like Athens and Sparta were forced to develop formal counterintelligence measures for the first time. They began systematically monitoring foreign merchants, interrogating travelers with new rigor, and creating internal security forces whose sole job was to find enemy agents within their own walls. A failure in one city became a textbook for security in all the others, sparking an endless cycle of innovation and counter-innovation across the ancient world. Yet, some of the most remarkable stories are of agents who turned personal failure into ultimate success. A captured Egyptian spy, instead of being executed, was given a choice by his captors: switch sides or die. He chose to pretend to defect, feeding his new masters carefully crafted misinformation for months. This double game, born from his initial capture, ultimately led his true homeland to a decisive military victory. His greatest contribution was not the intelligence he gathered, but the false intelligence he delivered, a triumph woven from the threads of his own failure. What can a modern tech company or a global corporation learn from these ancient mistakes? The principles are strikingly similar. A data breach today forces a complete overhaul of digital security protocols, just as a betrayed spy network did in Babylon. A failed product launch provides invaluable market intelligence for the next iteration. The ancient world understood that progress is often built upon the ruins of past disasters, and that an organization that does not learn from its failures is destined to repeat them. This iterative nature of intelligence work, this constant cycle of attempt, error, and refinement, ensured that the craft never stagnated. The lessons from these shadowy failures were too valuable to be lost, and so they were preserved not just in secret archives, but in the cultural artifacts and public stories that every citizen would know. A Greek vase depicts a warrior not in combat but whispering into another man's ear, his posture coiled with secrecy. This was not mere decoration, it was a silent manual. Such artifacts reveal the 25th unwritten rule, preservation through art and literature. When written records were too dangerous, ancient spy masters embedded the principles of their tradecraft into the cultural bedrock of their societies, using epic poems, sculptures, and paintings as covert archives to educate future generations. Historians now study these works not just for their aesthetic beauty, but as cryptic textbooks on the lost arts of intelligence. The symbolism woven into ancient art is a rich, unspoken language. In Egyptian tomb paintings, a scene of a scribe presenting a scroll to a pharaoh might seem straightforward. Yet, to a trained eye, the specific way the papyrus is held, the angle of the scribe's head, or the type of seal on the document could encode details about a specific intelligence network or a successful deception operation. The art was a dual-layered narrative, telling a public story of devotion while secretly recording the clandestine machinery of the state. Similarly, Mesopotamian cylinder seals, rolled across clay to create an impression, often featured intricate scenes of gods and heroes. But within these mythic tableaus, the positioning of animals or the direction of a gaze could serve as a mnemonic device, reminding an initiated agent of a particular surveillance technique or a dead drop location. Literature served a more profound purpose than simple record-keeping. It was a vehicle for moral instruction. The epic tales of cunning heroes were not just entertainment, they were case studies in ethical ambiguity. When a young recruit heard the story of Odysseus devising the Trojan horse, he was not just learning about a clever trick, he was being taught a difficult lesson about the necessity of mass deception, about sacrificing honor for victory. These stories provided a philosophical framework that justified the dirty, morally complex work of espionage, conditioning both the operatives and the public to accept that some truths must be hidden for the greater good. The challenges of interpreting these ancient sources, however, are immense. Without the living context of the culture, we can easily misread a symbolic gesture as a simple artistic flourish. A statue of a Roman senator with a hand tucked inside his toga might be a stylistic convention, or it could be a specific signal known to his political allies, a silent code forever lost to us. This forces modern historians to become detectives themselves, cross-referencing archaeological finds with fragmented texts to piece together the hidden meanings in the art. How does this ancient practice of encoding secrets in public view relate to our world today? We see its direct descendant in the use of media and film. A modern spy thriller does more than entertain. It shapes public perception of intelligence agencies, it glorifies certain tactics, and it can even serve as a subtle recruitment tool, much like the epic poems of old. The ancient rule reminds us that culture has always been a primary battleground for information, where the stories we tell and the art we create are never just stories or art. They are the vessels through which the most sensitive knowledge navigates the treacherous waters of time, waiting for the right eyes to see the message within the masterpiece. A modern intelligence analyst might find the most advanced cybersecurity flaw by studying the substitution ciphers of ancient Rome. This is the 26th unwritten rule, the enduring influence of these lost arts on modern espionage. The core principles forged in the shadows of antiquity did not vanish. They simply evolved, proving that the human dynamics of secrecy and trust are timeless. The direct lineage from ancient techniques to modern methods is startlingly clear. The Roman use of mundane objects as hiding places finds its echo in today's dead drops and microfilm, while the complex non-verbal signals of the Byzantine court are the direct ancestors of the hand signs and environmental markers used by modern special forces. Even the ancient preference for psychological manipulation over brute force is the bedrock of contemporary information warfare, where disinformation campaigns target our digital lives with the same precision a Persian agent once used to plant a rumor in a rival's court. This historical continuum offers profound lessons in counterintelligence. By understanding how ancient spies were detected, through a misplaced sandal or a poorly told cover story, modern agencies can better train their own operatives to avoid these age-old pitfalls. The meticulous compartmentalization of spy networks in ancient India, designed to protect the whole if one part was captured, is the exact structural model used by insurgent and terrorist cells today. To defeat such networks, one must first understand their ancient blueprint. This deep connection forces us to revisit ethical debates that have spanned centuries. The moral ambiguity faced by a Spartan spy ordered to betray a friend is the same dilemma a modern deep cover agent confronts when their mission threatens innocent lives. The ancient justification of acting for the greater good is the same reasoning used to sanction drone strikes or mass surveillance programs. These are not new problems, they are ancient human conflicts amplified by modern technology. So, what can today's spies truly learn from these age-old rules? They learn that technology changes, but people do not. The most sophisticated satellite cannot read a person's intentions, and the most powerful computer cannot replicate the intuitive trust built between a handler and their source. The ancient spies mastered the human element, and in a world increasingly dominated by machines, that may be the most valuable lesson of all. This bridge between past and present leads us to a final, inevitable question. What ultimately became of these unwritten rules, and why were they so completely lost to history? Our journey through these silent corridors reveals a profound legacy built not on gadgets, but on human ingenuity. These unwritten rules of ancient espionage teach us that true power lies in perception, in the subtle understanding of people and the environments they inhabit. From the art of becoming invisible in a crowd to the heartbreaking sacrifice of personal identity, these operatives mastered a craft where wisdom and ethics were their most vital tools. Their world reminds us that secrecy, when guided by respect and a deeper purpose, can become a force that shapes history for the better, protecting communities and preserving peace. As you move through your own life, consider how these ancient insights might apply. Perhaps it is in the careful way you safeguard your private information online, a digital form of that old art of invisibility. Maybe it is in your ability to read a room during a difficult conversation, using observation as your silent guide. Or it could be in the small, ethical choices you make when navigating complex relationships, understanding that trust is the ultimate currency. These echoes from the past encourage us to look beyond the surface, to listen more intently, and to value the profound strength found in human connection. If this exploration into the whispers of history has sparked your curiosity, there are countless more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Share your own reflections on how these ancient rules resonate with you in the comments below. For more journeys into the hidden corners of our past, subscribe and join us next time. Thank you for venturing into the shadows where the silent rules of spies still speak to us across the centuries.